Afternoon, folks. We're back again. How are we all today? I hope we're all feeling well. I'm a wee bit early, a couple of seconds early, but for some reason it sort of went off early. Anyway, let's have a look and see who's in. Hi, Chris. Hi, Jeanette. Hi, Rosie. Hi, Stephen Nichol. Tina Chalmers. Graham Beanie. Chris Fisher. Oh, I've already mentioned you, Chris. Desiree. 74. The Gers. Oh, good afternoon, 74 the Gers. Steve, I've mentioned you, Stephen, and Tina up there in Dundee. I've mentioned you, Graham. Jeanette Gilfillan, hello. Stephen Bankier. Peter M, 70, hello. What's with these bloody numbers? Robert the Bruce, afternoon. Eddie Wolfie, afternoon. Good afternoon, Alistair. And if you don't know, Viper Scott 1 is Alistair. And Dave McBeathran. Well, back down the bottom. Anyway, we're 75 years in so far. That's no bad. Hi, Lorna. Hi, Jim. Hi, Laura. Hi, Laurie. How are you? Ali Watson's in the house. Jim Sorrell was here. Mel, I've given you a mention, I think. Right. Let's go on with this. The new format will be as it's been. Well, day 1 to 3. And today, on the bit where we remind ourselves how politics should work, we'll be covering manifestos and how we used to decide who to vote for prior to the current political climate. But we'll leave it at that until we get there, okay? So it's the Two Davies on the 15th to the 12th, 2025. Minus a Davy. Now, I didn't speak to David over the weekend. I haven't spoke to him today, but I'm sure I'll catch up with him soon. Anyway, first up, Scottish Government drops plans to lower national speed limit. Now, folks, here's a wee challenge for you. Stick in the comments what you actually think the national speed limit is. And then we'll go on to it. I'll give you a few seconds while I read this one out. Wee something for the rains. Thanks very much, Pete's Music. Thank you. As you guys know, it all goes to food banks and baby banks in our communities. And I say this often, and I mean it, I'm very proud of our community because we've come together as a bunch of people who have decided that we can do something. Now, David and I could have done this as a side hustle and probably done quite well with the actual amount of times you guys send super chats. But that's never been David and I's objective. We don't need to make money. Right, so what we got in the national speed limits so far. We'll get Stephen Kelly on 30 mph, but he doesn't drive. We'll get Kirsty Hamilton on the speed limit is 70 mile an hour. We've got Ali Watson on 70 mile an hour. And of course, Alistair's correct. The national speed limit is 60 miles per hour. 70 miles per hour only applies to motorways. Now, Sir Larry the Cat likes to portray me as Professor McGuinness when it comes to political ideologies, and I'm pretty chuffed about that because, let's face it, we do our homework in this channel, and you guys know what you're talking about. Stephen, when we're talking about in built up areas, we're not talking about the national speed limit. All right, we're talking about local bylaws when we talk about the speed within built up areas. Okay, as I say, but Solari likes to bum me up on, the political knowledge that we've garnered here over the years that we've been doing this stuff. But those of you who know me, I'm not called Indy Truck Davy for nothing. If there's one thing I do know, it's slabs, it's ribbons, it's roads. I've been a truck driver for a very, very long time. I've driven in every classification of roads, including those roads that are not classified. And the one thing that I will say about the national speed limit, when it comes to roads, it's about right. On certain dual carriageways, they've changed the rules to allow heavy goods vehicles to move a wee bit faster and LGVs to move a wee bit faster in order to keep the flow moving better. But as I say, I do know about roads. Now, the government drops plans to drop the national speed limit of 60 mile an hour to 50 miles an hour on A, B, dual carriageways, A, B and C roads and urban clearways. And of course, non-classified roads, of which in these islands there are many. And I mean that, private roads, they're not classified. Some of them are single track. Some of them are just faking tracks. But as I say, non-classified. One thing I do know a lot about is roads. And the idea of dropping the national speed limit to 50 mile an hour, well, the argument's got to do with deaths and the amount of deaths on Scottish roads and the cause of deaths on Scottish roads. Speed is one of them, but it's generally because the driver's a dickhead. It's generally because the driver doesn't understand the strip they're driving on. They don't understand their own limitations. They don't understand the vehicle's limitations or its level of maintenance. I've said this repeatedly, roads don't fucking kill. They're inanimate objects. Inanimate objects don't rise up and kill you. It's about the driver, the machine, and understanding the very function that is operating a vehicle in all conditions. And when it comes to this sort of stuff, I can claim to be a fucking expert. I've spent a long time on the road in various vehicles of various sizes and various conditions. I understand the byways and highways. 60 mile an hour for the national speed limit is correct. But as has been pointed out in the chat, there are circumstances where that has to drop. 74 the Gers, thank you very much for your contribution to the food banks fund today and the baby bank fund today. It is appreciated, as is every contribution we get. Now, as I say, this idea of dropping the national speed limit, it was today be limiting the amount of deaths on the roads. How many people died in Scotland's roads last year? 160. The Scottish Government's ambition is to half that and make Scotland's roads the safest roads in the world by 2030. Now, that's a very ambitious idea. But it doesn't have to do with upgrading things like the A9 and the A96 and the A74. Nothing to do with that. It's about educating drivers. It's about educating drivers. And the thing is, people, especially young people, who think once they've passed their driving test, they've learned how to drive. Well, I'll tell you what, I've been at it since I was 17. I'm 58. I can claim to be a good, competent driver of almost every class of vehicle on the road. But I'm a modest man, so I'm not going to say I'm an expert. But what I will say is I understand more about tarmac strips than what I do about politics, and I know a shitload about both. So the idea of dropping the national speed limit to 50 mile an hour was based on saving lives. But when we looked at the studies and then we put out the public consultation, it wasn't popular with public, and the studies didn't back it up. They just didn't back it up. The causes of fatalities on the road are generally pretty well solid. Driver error, lack of maintenance of machines, or no understanding the road conditions in which you're driving in. So there is no need to drop the national speed limit from 60 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour. There is a need for an education campaign to make people understand that when they get behind the wheel, they're driving a lethal weapon. It's not just lethal to others, it's lethal to them if they don't understand the vehicle, its level of maintenance, and their own capabilities. All right, so let's move on to the subject that I'm really well versed in. As a guy that's been a professional driver for a long time. Back to the politics of the day. And next up, we have the Greens draw the oxygen from the latest Labour and Tory fire. It's not about the vehicle. You think a camper van's a nightmare? Try sitting behind my fucking big rig, you're not like that either. It's not about the vehicle. It's about understanding the vehicle, the conditions, and your own abilities. Oh, by the way, the sun's over the yard dam and I'm on a day off, so cheers. Right, let's move on and see the Greens throw the air out of the unionist lungs when it comes to their squealing for the resignation of the Justice Secretary, Angela Constance, and also the Education Secretary, Schools BBC Scotland, on how things work in the Parliament and how things are recorded in the Parliament. And believe me, when Jenny said that the Justice Secretary, well, let's get back to it. What's this all about? Well, the Justice Secretary made a quote or quoted somebody else in a debate on the idea of public inquiry into grooming gangs. You know how I feel about public inquiries, folks, especially the cuckoos in the nest. They use these mechanisms, public inquiries and FOIs, to fuck up the business of the Parliament and to drain the public purse. But the cuckoos in the nest have been demanding that the Justice Secretary stand down because a quote she gave during the debate on whether there should be a grooming gang inquiry in Scotland. Now, Jenny Gilruth tells BBC Scotland on Sunday that it was a general quote, and that's how it's listed in the official records. Well, to be honest with you folks, and I mean this, for those that don't understand how these minutes are kept and how these things are published, Hansard is the name of the people who do these things. And they've been at it for a couple of 100 years now, I think. Before devolution, They exclusively recorded everything that went on in Westminster, which they still do, and they tend to record actually everything that goes on officially in the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament. I don't know what the script is in Northern Ireland. I'm not going to lie about it, I don't. Right, but Hansard very, very seldom get anything wrong. I use Hansard as a reference myself when there is a story in the newspapers about what an MP, an MSP, or an LA says in the various parliaments on these islands. Hansard's a great place to go and check out exactly what's being said as opposed to what's being reported and what's being said. Because remember, you can always take something out of context. And that's basically what's happened here with these two cuckoos in the nest who are screaming for Angela Constance to stand down, saying that she misled the Parliament on a quote by Professor Alexis. I can't remember her name now. We'll get it up. That was a quote by no, it doesn't even say here in the article. Anyway, it was Professor Alexis something. Alexis J, that's who it was. And she's an expert on sex offences against children, apparently. But as I say, the Greens really poked the air right out of their lungs because they made it quite clear. You guys are at it, and we ain't playing. But what's interesting about that is the game along there for Labour, Lib Dem, Tory, and soon to be joined by Reform. Their numbers as a collective won't be any bigger, but they'll have another voice. Destructive voice, dangerous voice, but they'll have another voice. And that will continue to be the game in Holyrood until we make it illegal for political parties registered in other parts of the UK to participate in our elections. Can we do that? Yes, elections are wholly devolved, with the exception of referenda on the Constitution. But to me, that doesn't matter very much. I've said this before. Let's have a referendum every 6 months, and taking back one power after another to Westminster becomes totally irrelevant. Because after all, they did give us the power in the 2016 Scotland Act. Let's fucking use it. Let's have a referendum every other fucking week to take back powers for doing that road. If we vote to take back the power of energy, they're going to argue against it. They're going to deny it when we're using a legal process given to us by them. Highly unlikely. Now let's move on to the tragedy that happened in Scotland this week. Last week, on Thursday. And that is Reform UK wins first Scottish by-election in West Lothian. David McLennan wins the vote in round 8 with 148 votes over the SNP. Mr. McLennan said it's a clear indication the people of Blackburn and Whitburn have voted for a new direction. And that is true. They have voted for a new direction. They voted for fucking fascism. I was stunned. I was shocked. Absolutely. A new direction. well, let's say recycling in all direction. Now, what brought about this vote? Well, it wasn't a vote for a positive direction. This was a unionist fraternity in the area, understanding that Labour and Tory are a bust flush. They need a new unionist party to get behind. So they chose fascism. Because fascism equals unionism. And we know that quite here with things like the denying of the democratic will of the Scottish people, the restricting and denying the basic human rights of self-determination. But I keep coming back to the idea that fascism is creeping in. But if that's what unionists have got left to stand behind, we've already won, folks. We've already won. This isn't a matter of how, if, or what. It's a matter of when, and it's no far away. It really isn't. But voter apathy really helped. People still don't vote in local elections. They don't quite understand the amount of influence the local authorities have in their lives, even though the local authorities are the first level of power they come across through housing, hygiene, education. People don't really understand the importance of voting in local authority elections. They think the parliament's the everything. And this really is due to a lack of understanding, which seems to become prevalent in the last 15 to 20 years as digital culture has sort of taken front and centre. And that sorts of brings me on to what we were talking about when we were talking about the reminding myself how politics should work and how it used to work. So this is where we get to the point where Davy says, let's remind ourselves and any young people watching how democracy used to work and how it should work. So in this section today, we're going to talk about how we used to decide who to vote for before the footballification of politics and the current front runner, the cult of personality, which we've seen Trump pull off in the USA. So how did we used to do these things, folks? Well, political parties used to publish something called a manifesto. What is a manifesto? Let's get it up. What is a political manifesto? A political manifesto is a public declaration by a political party or candidate outlining their key policies, aims, and promises for governing. Typically released before an election to persuade voters they are the best choice, detailing plans for the economy, health, education, and so much more. To show what they do if they were elected. Key elements of a manifesto: policy proposals, specific plans for government action like tax cuts, health improvements, environmental initiatives, on and on. Vision and narrative explains the party's overall philosophy. Now, we were talking about philosophies before we go here, so let's go over what the philosophies are that affect us here at this point in time. we have socialism, we have liberalism, and we have neoliberalism all at play at this point in time. Okay, and fascism is also coming into play. So vision and narrative explains the party's overall philosophy and the big picture they want to create for the country. They're also used for candidate introduction. At every election, you've got new candidates coming in and they want to be introduced with a manifesto in their area to show they're keen for the job. All right, the purposes of a manifesto: inform voters to clarify communication of what a party stands for, persuade voters to convince the electorate to vote for them by presenting appealing solutions to problems, accountability: serve as a benchmark for promises made during the campaign which parties are expected to implement if they win. Format: traditionally a written document, but can also be a visual document with posters and videos, or presented in speeches. Often includes memorable slogans, which is quite interesting because that's where we've been for the last wee while. We get Brexit done and Labour for change. Three-word slogans seem to be how politics works today. Now, back when prior to the digital age, if you wanted to view a party manifesto, there was a few ways of getting it. You could go direct to your branch, if you remember. Maybe stick a couple of quid and they give you a copy. Back before the digital age, newspapers, depending on whether they were left, right, or centre leaning, would serialise whatever party's manifesto they favoured, so you could actually get it in the press. Or you could go to your local library, where all the parties would have had a copy of their manifesto posted. Now, of course, the digital age means it should have been easier to get access to political parties' manifestos. But as it turns out, they don't really write them anymore. They really don't write them anymore. You get a vague outline of what they think they represent and what they think they might be able to do without making any concrete promises. Now, the thing about a manifesto was it laid out exactly what it was that the political party you were voting for intended to do in their time in government. I think there's only one party left on these islands that are still producing a proper manifesto, and that's the SNP, actually. They still offer a vision and the route, and the record in government is about 80, 90, 95% of policies announced in manifestos being implemented. And that's pretty good. But any young people watching this, advice on future voting intentions: stay away from the cult of personality, stay away from the footballification of politics, where you've got a red flag, a blue flag, a yellow flag, an orange flag, a fascist flag. Stay away from that stuff. Go back to how it should be done. Look for political parties' manifestos on the run-up to an election and read them. And choose who you're going to vote for, based on the manifestos, because that's how we used to do it prior to the digital age. It's how it should be done, and it's where we need to get back to. If we're going to clean up politics, whether it be in independent Scotland or UK-wide, we have got to be much clearer in our minds and who it is and what it is we are voting for. So Get your scarf off. Forget the cult of personality and start looking at what's in your best interest by reading manifestos again. It's where we need to get to. We need to get to the point where those who have come behind us understand how the system should fucking work and understand the fact that they need to vote in local elections because your local council has a much bigger impact on you and your children's lives than fucking central government. And there endeth the lesson for today. That's me done my pontification on how things should be done. All right. So this week we were covering how voting should be done. How people should get the information that they make their vote on. The way things used to be done. Before political parties became football teams. All right, let's move on. This one split opinion in Scotland, really. And that's the not proven verdict to disappear from Scottish trials from the 1st of January 2026. Now, folks, as you know, this has had the legal fraternity fucking pulling their hair out here. But let's throw some common sense on this. Since we ended the double jeopardy rules, the not proven verdict has not been necessary. The double jeopardy rules in law basically says if somebody's been tried and found not guilty, they shouldn't be tried again. But the way we do things now and the approach of things have changed. So what happens now is if new evidence comes to light, then there will be a retrial. Prior to this double jeopardy kicked in, there wouldn't be a retrial. And that's why here in Scotland we had something called the not proven verdict. Because if you were if you were given the not proven verdict by a jury here in Scotland, that meant you weren't no guilty. We just didn't have enough evidence to prove it at this point in time, and we could bypass the double jeopardy rule and take you back to court. But because the double jeopardy rule's basically been thrown in the bin, and legal mindsets have changed on this, then the not proven verdict isn't really necessary here in Scotland anymore. If new evidence does come to light, then a new investigation will be launched and you will be arrested again if you're the front runner for that particular crime. As I say, in the past, not proven was used to allow that sort of thing to happen, to bypass the judicial norms of the time, which was not proven. Which was not guilty, can't be dragged back in front of the courts. Well, that's changed. The mindset on that changed, so not proven is no necessary anymore. Am I sad to see it go? Yes. Why? Because it served a purpose, which is no longer there, of course, and it made it unique in legal systems worldwide. It meant that there was a way around double jeopardy here in Scotland. It meant that if a jury pronounced you not proven, you weren't free. You always had it hanging over you. And if new evidence came out, you could be dragged back into court. That was unique in legal circles around the world, where they had the double jeopardy rule, where once tried and found not guilty, you couldn't be tried again. There you go. Well, of course, forensics and modern science is what's tipped to balance here. And it means that the not proven verdict isn't really necessary anymore. But I was sorry to see it go just because it was quirky. And it was unique within the legal systems worldwide. Because it meant where everybody else's legal system would say, you've been tried, you're free to go, you've been found not guilty, and it'd just be a case closed, never to be looked at again. In Scotland, we're not proven, it meant the case was always open and always hanging over the person, which meant if new evidence came to light, they could be dragged back into court. And Ali, you've had it not proven, have you? Well, there you go, mate. It's still hanging out your fucking head, and it will keep hanging out your head, even under the new system. Any new evidence, Ali, you're back in the fucking dock. Right, let's move on. Sunak. No, let's start with Starmer, shall we? Starmer's in front of the Select Committee today to justify his term in office up till now. Now, I'm only mentioning it because the committee meeting was live at the time when I was writing this, and I haven't had the time to have a look at Hansard and see what was said. But I am pointing out it was there in case anybody wants to have it on the background. I don't know if he's still in committee. Normally they're only there for about an hour at a time. So, but Starmer faces the Select Committee at Westminster today to basically examine his first 18 months in office and his achievements. So when that committee meeting, it's probably over by now, but when I finish this, I will be going to have a look to see what's went on. And I have absolutely no doubt that my good friend Darren, or Daily Blase, I've no doubt that he was watching the committee and will be firing something out on it. And I look forward to it because he's always got a good take on these things. A really well balanced take, even if he does it with a comical slant. The other thing that's big at the moment doing that road is that Sunak's in front of the COVID inquiry to tell the inquiry that layoffs were inevitable during the pandemic and that furlough was a generous and a well thought out idea. I don't know if it was well thought out. There was so many people missed out. The self-employed, they've only quite missed out, but they've only quite treated equally and things like that. It was more focused on PAYE. Now, was the furlough a good thing? Beyond a doubt. Beyond a doubt. It was also the right thing. It's not very often government spend the money on the right thing. But this was the right thing. It also boosted national wealth for a while, believe it or not. Except for those in the poorest wage brackets, because they were all on essential jobs, so had to go to work. But if you were sort of middle salaried and working from home, you were quids in, you'd no commute, you'd no extra expenses for lunch and things like that. Your electricity bill might have went up a wee bit, but generally the company you're working for would compensate you for increased use on these things. You might have been on a reduced salary 80%, as I say, but your costs come down a good bit. You're on a really good salary and you were only 80% of your salary to sit in the house. You were quids in. And I mean quids in. But when we get right down to it, furlough during the pandemic was about the only fucking thing they got right. And I mean that. I'm looking forward to when they start re-examining them on the eat out to help the virus out kill your gran. That'll be interesting again. But as I say, Sunak's back in front of the committee. This time he's talking about the furlough scheme. And it's not very often I agree with anything that comes out of Westminster. But the furlough scheme was the right thing to do. It definitely was the right thing to do. And when this inquiry comes to an end, there will be very few things that the government of the day during the pandemic will be praised for, the furlough scheme will be one of them. Imperfect as it was, so many people dropped through the cracks, which was probably deliberate actually in the way it was set up, because you know what the Tories are. But it was the right thing to do, especially for PAYE employees. So, as I say, Sunak's in front of the COVID inquiry today. That's really quite important. But the next story is even more important because it tells us more about this so-called Labour Party. And that is that the doctors down that road have decided that they will go on strike, even though they've had a late offer from Westminster. So doctors vote to go ahead with this 5-day strike in England. The 5-day doctor strike in England will go ahead despite a new offer from the government. The British Medical Association said 83% of its members had voted to continue with the walkout, and an online poll over the weekend turned out was 65%. Now, here's the thing, folks. We're in the middle of a winter flu epidemic right across these islands. The very fact that Streeton has gone to war with the medical profession in the middle of a fucking epidemic tells you all there is to know about this government if you didn't already garner it from their support for Israel and an ongoing genocide in Gaza. And I say ongoing even though it's supposed to be a ceasefire and a peace settlement. I'm still seeing figures of people dying in Palestine and Gaza every day at the hands of the IDF. The numbers might have shrunk down to less than double digits, but it still goes on. And we're still not talking about the people who are dying for starvation because the Israelis are still strangling food supplies. Anyway, doctors down that road, they've decided to continue striking. West Streeton's idea of being a party of the worker is to go to war with them. The most important profession on these fucking islands when it comes to economic prosperity, because they're tasked with keeping us all fit, is being attacked by central government because they want their wages restored. Yep, they had a whopping big pay rise. That was basically just restoration. But we're a couple of years further in now, and all of a sudden, they're back to where they were again, getting paid fucking less than what they were 10 years ago. But it tells you the mindset of that government down that road. When they're going to war with the most important profession in the UK when it comes to economic prosperity. We talk about things that you need in your land to make it economically prosperous. You need a well-educated population. You need a healthy, happy population, a motivated population. And in order to have a happy, healthy population, you require the medical profession to be on their game. But here we have the Westminster government gone to fucking war with the doctors. Now, we've seen this 2 years ago down that road. Whereas here in Scotland, the SNP government have sat at the table, they've put the books on the table, and they said, let's be square with you guys. This is the situation we're in. This is what we can offer. If needs be, we'll cut elsewhere to offer you more because you're more important. But please don't fuck us and the people who are doing our best. And so we haven't had any strikes. But is Streeton taking that approach? Nah, he just went fuckies. But let's face it, he's taking money for private healthcare. And he's opening up NHS England to more and more private healthcare. He's depriving NHS England of funds. And when we talked about neoliberalism and outsourcing, I did mean to talk about the outsourcing of GP services down that road. And here, well, we've got hedge funds and multinationals running chains of GP services. What West Streeton did in England because of the 2012 a Health and Social Care Act, what he's doing is he's given the surgeries a choice to send you to an NHS facility or a private facility. And if that doctor's been bunged a wee bit by the private sector, you're going to the private sector. Unless it's something really serious, then that'll be kept in-house in the NHS because that's expensive, long term, and the private sector don't want to deal with it. They can't make a quick buck out of it. But the fact that Labour are going to war with any fucking trade union, a party founded on trade unionism, it is fascinating stuff to behold. It really is. It is unbelievable. But as I say, let's get to the serious side of this here. West Streeton knows that England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland at this point in time are in the middle of a serious flu epidemic, which is likely to kill more than what it normally does. And rather make sure that more people survive by ensuring the doctors are at their posts, he's fucking gone to war with them. You couldn't make this shit up, folks. Don't give a fuck about your granny. Only give a fuck about the shekels and the treasury. The interesting thing about the shekels and that fucking treasury is it's not their money, it's ours. And we want it spent on my granny. We want our doctors not just to be well paid, we want them to be well motivated and the best in the world. It's not the case though. You want the best medical profession in the world, best national health service in the world, you go to Cuba. But as I say, it's fascinating. And when we look at it and reflect on it, and one of the other vloggers here in Scotland that fascinates me is a boy called Red Glasgow. Look it up. And his insights into this stuff are actually pretty well mirrored on mine. But that's based on life experience and understanding of what the left is, what the left's supposed to do. Okay. Right. And of course, on top of all the chaos, in order to keep public control, you have to throw a wee bit of fear into the mix. And of course, when it comes to fear and fear mongering, top of the chain right now is, of course, Russia, because its proximity to Europe and its war in Ukraine. So what's today's or this week's fear story? Well, new MI6 chief, Blaise Metawelli, I hope I got the pronunciation of that right, she will highlight how so-called hybrid warfare, such as cyber attacks and drones launched near critical infrastructure, poses a huge threat to the UK. They're calling it hybrid warfare. Now, folks, on the cyber attacks, I can buy that. I can buy that. You know, I mean, we've all had We're in social media platforms hacked at one point or another. But let's take that in national infrastructure and hack it. Shut down the electricity supply to hospitals. Shut down the hospital computer system so you can access to medical records or that sort of thing. Aye, this is all real stuff. But see this shite about drones next to critical infrastructure. Folks, that's nonsense. That's just drone pilots. No reading the signs on the fences of the infrastructure. They're photographing. But do you really need to put your own drone up to get this stuff? Nah, you don't. Well, let's have a look at some critical infrastructure here in Scotland, shall we? West Davies just plucked right off the fucking internet. Where are we? Aerial view of Grangemouth refinery. How many images you want? How many? That one there in the middle's for the council. Aye, Grangemouth and Falkirk Council. Aye, that one there. I've got my pointer on. Ah, critical infrastructure, there's there. What a lot of bollocks. Talk about fear mongering. Let's take that down. Ah, and I thought, well, let's have a look at military infrastructure near me. I thought, okay, what's the nearest barracks? Redford. Because Elizabeth Yards has been set off. So Redford Barracks. So I just put into Google. Images of Redford Barracks, please. Aerial views of Redford Barracks. Here we go. Yeah, take your pick. Yeah. Sorry, Roberts Barracks. Yeah, Roberts Barracks there. Full view. There's the stores there. Yeah. And the ones at the back there. Right along there. The 4 buildings there. That's for each of the troops. They're called armories. Military leave, it's the same all over the place, right across the UK. So there you go. I could pinpoint the stores for this one picture, and I could pinpoint the armories for this one picture. Sort of makes sense. You keep the explosive shit as far away from the living quarters as possible. It's not hard. Now, you want to look at Parade Square. There you go. So, the fear-mongering today, folks, and the reds under the beds. You can see your house for here. They say, there's nonsense about drones being launched near the critical infrastructure. You don't need to bother. You've got council websites. You've got the plant itself's websites. You've got the barracks itself's websites. You've got Google Earth. What a lot of fucking nonsense. But it's understanding how this works, folks. Fear is a good tool for controlling the public. Oh, she's operating out of Dubai, is she, Millie? Doesn't want to pay her tax in the UK. But hey, as I say, folks, fear is a useful tool when it comes to controlling the population. So it's always handy for the propagandists, meaning the press, to throw a wee bit of fear in the mix. So, once again, are people 2,000-3,000 miles away to the east who have no fucking interest in us are apparently the enemy. They're busy like us trying to survive every fucking day. And yet we're supposed to treat them as enemies. Comedy, the only defence we have. Oh, I don't need a lecture on air defences, mate. That's one thing I do know. But defence against drones looking at critical infrastructure, think about it, comedy. There's no fucking need for it. Some of the pictures of critical infrastructure here in Scotland, meaning Grangemouth and Roberts Barracks, were plucked right off the fucking council's websites. The Russians don't need to put up drones to look at critical infrastructure. It's all out there on the net. But when it comes to the defence of these islands and air security, whether it be missile-based air defences or whether it be RAF ground-to-air defences, you're absolutely right, comedy. They're non-fucking existent. But the notion that the Russians are putting drones up to look at barracks and fucking power plants and refineries and things like that is fucking nonsense. They don't need to. The cyber attack thing, we've actually seen this happen. We've had SEPA have its computers hacked. There's been NHS boards right across the UK had their stuff hacked. So if she was talking about that, but hybrid warfare, that's interesting. Right. I think we've covered a fair bit today, folks, especially what's been going on here in Scotland. I really found the Greens drawing the air out of the blaze that the Tories and Labour were trying to start under Angela Constance. I found that hilarious because it's becoming a pattern. Have Labour and the Conservative Party in Scotland ever managed to win a vote of no confidence? No. You can look this up. But what one of their attempts at it did was force probably what was going to be one of the best First Ministers we've ever had out of a job. Because Holmes had decided to fall on the sword rather than have the Greens take him out of circulation because he broke the alliance between the Scottish Government and the Greens for whatever reason. Okay. Right, guys. Thanks very much for your kind contributions today. I'm going to wind this one up just a couple of minutes early because it's hard to do a whole hour in your in. Thanks to the moderators for moderating it. I hope you found the content interesting. I hope you found it informative, and I hope you found the delivery entertaining enough to be able to sit through an hour. All right. Cyber attacks, I'm buying for MI6. Drones are critical infrastructure. I'm not buying that. You don't need to put a drone up unless you want to attack it. And the idea that my mate, old Nick, doing a whistle, going out and flying his drone for fun as a Russian proxy, I'm not buying that shit. I've known Lyle for a long time. Really great guy. Done a couple of investigations together. Anyway, use a lot out after each other, and I'll be back tomorrow morning, 10:30, to look out over the headlines. Now I'm going to go and get something to eat, relax, and enjoy the evening. So we're about 4 minutes shorter than normal, but that's it for today's Two Davies. As I say, minus a Davy. Hopefully I'll get back soon. Bye for now.